Buenos días, buenos días. This is DJ Morena Libre here on the Feminist Hour, La Hora Feminista. Thank you for those that are listening. It's Friday. It is a beautiful day outside. I was walking in and it was like around 78 degrees and it was getting windy. It wasn't as windy as it is now though. So I hope everyone's having a good day, that you're drinking your coffee or your tea or your water. If you were able to get one. So today, Joel is not going to be here. He abandoned the show again, this time to go to a conference in Edinburgh. So I hope his session is going well. Okay, but today we have a guest. I put it on social media, so we have a wonderful guest today, la doctora Rosalba Resendiz. So la doctora Resendiz is an associate professor in the Department of Criminal Justice here at UTRGV. She received her PhD from Texas Women's University in 2001. So her work engages critical Chicana feminism with a focus on intersectionality and identity politics, considering colonialism, decolonialism, and post-colonialism. Her activism and research intersects border studies, Chicana feminism, social justice, and critical criminology. She is researching and has published on corridos and soldaderas, as well as indigenous resistance and injustice in the border. I'm so excited you're here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today.
I'm sorry about the parking.
It's okay, but it's not your fault. It's the UTRGV fault. Of course, there's no word to complain about this. So.
Yeah, and it's hard. Parking is hard because then if we build more parking, then it becomes a nuisance. And then we're in an urban, it's going to be hard to grow, right? Because then you have to push out the people that are living here.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like,
Yeah,
you know.
I don't think we're going to grow much more over here, honestly. Yeah. I don't see the space for it.
Mhm.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
And TSC has a lot of students, and it's very active. It's a beautiful campus.
También, I know.
Sí, está bien bonito.
I know.
Yeah.
I miss going out there because when I was here
Yeah.
years ago, it was TSC and UTB, and it was packed. Like you could see a lot of people in the TSC side, which is now TSC.
Yeah.
It was, yeah, it was.
I was a
nice.
kid. I was in, I think middle school or maybe high school. But I was a kid, and they had special classes for college back in the day. I don't even know if it was the 80s or I think somewhere in the
Back
80s.
in the day.
Back in the day. And they had classes here at TSC, a special program for, certain students. And we got to be here also. So that was fun. But also it was my first taste of college. Really young. Yeah. So I loved it. I love the space. I've always been in love with university spaces. I've never left the university. So to me, university spaces are home.
Really?
And I feel comfortable in them. Yeah. It's the people that mess it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Well, we
spaces,
normally do, right?
Yeah.
Like humans are, yeah.
Yeah, but university spaces, I loved it. Hiding around in the library, reading books. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to come to the TSC library all the time, which was
The Oliveira?
It was called Oliveira?
Yeah, that was I guess they used to lease space for the city, from the city.
Yeah.
No. The city might have leased space from TSC so that they could have their library there.
Yeah. And I
Because
used
that's
to
the one I used to go to.
I used to go all the time. And my dad used to think that I was out to meet boys there and going to do bad stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm reading books, man. That's all I'm doing. I'm a nerd. I want to go and read books. I just loved it. There were so many
There
books
was.
and history books. And I would love going down the aisles and checking out what was going on. So I ended up working at libraries all my life, actually. Even in fourth grade was my first job as a library assistant. Yeah. In middle school, I actually had electives to be the library assistant.
Oh, wow.
High school, I had to, be more engaged with band, so I didn't. But when I went to college, I ended up working at the library again. So, yeah. And I used to not work so hard. I'm not the best worker in the library. So I would sit and read the books and check out the books. And I would just do my work really fast, and then I would sit and hide and read books. Yeah. I got called up about it, but it's the library. Books. I love books.
And it's funny, right? The way labor is like there's a boundary in labor, right? You can't enjoy your work.
Yeah, no, no.
Like you're there in a library, you're gonna open up a book, right? Why not enjoy it?
No, no. You just have to go put them in order, all of them.
And then come back and sit and wait. Yeah.
And keep putting them in order or fixing them. And you have to do so much per hour.
Yeah.
Which I did, but then I sat and read.
Yeah.
I was fast.
I've worked in one library, the UT San Antonio Medical Library.
Wow, but that was different.
It was, well, I got to see a lot of books on medicine,
Yeah.
and those were really interesting. Yeah, especially because they use a lot of images. It just felt very scientific, and it was interesting, but I didn't feel like, oh, like I feel like a voyeur. Does that make sense? Yeah. Like I was invading somebody's privacy. Yeah, with those books. Yeah.
And you know what? People don't really go to the library as much anymore. They Google everything or they Wikipedia everything. So it sounds like it's easier, but we're getting really bad information because of it.
Yeah.
So we have really warped sense of what really is factual nowadays.
Yeah, like you have to learn how to search online to be able to get the credible sources that you need. Joel, he's not here, but he's a librarian, and that's what we've talked about quite a bit, how students they can graduate from UTRGV and have never stepped foot in the library.
Or use online databases.
Or exactly. Yeah. They go like to Google or somewhere else.
I tell students, at least use Google Scholar.
Yeah. And then I think there's also like at one point they were giving a class on how to use Wikipedia because it's used so much and students were citing it and professors didn't want it cited, right? So you have to educate people, right, how to use it.
I'm thinking about using a Wikipedia assignment. They actually been reaching out and they're setting it up. Well, they assured me that they try to keep it as factual as possible, but they're actually getting students and professors to be part of it.
Yeah.
So that way we can fill in the areas that are kind of missing out. For example, people of color or issues of people of color, social justice issues. So they're trying, hopefully it'll be successful. I'm considering it for an assignment, but then I'm like, I'm not sure.
I read this, I saw a report on a scientist. No, maybe she's not a scientist. A woman who does Wikipedia pages, but for women who have been forgotten in history. And it's mainly like that's probably why I think she's a scientist, because she highlights women in STEM fields. Yeah, so that's kind of cool, right? Like that's a cool project that you could do with Wikipedia.
Yeah, so I might do something, but it'll be till the fall probably. But it still requires a lot of extra work. And coffee. Coffee as it is, we have so much to do, and I don't know. I'm still not sure about it. But at the same time, though, we all use Wikipedia. Yeah. Every professor does, regardless if we say we don't.
Well, that's sometimes a landing page. Like that's the first page that comes up when you're searching something. Unless you go to Google Scholar, right? Then it doesn't. But it just a general page, like that's the one like pops up, So it's I'm sure the most clicked as well. Yeah. So tell us, tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you're saying that you grew up here in Bronzeville, right? The library, your experience, your love for books and learning.
Oh, yeah, that's kind of my obsession. Learning. Yeah, I've never stopped learning. It's been kind of a bit much, I guess, in the point that I get exasperated if it's for example, if I listen to a YouTube channel and I want to learn something and they're too slow, I have to speed it up. I'm always like, okay, get to the point. What's going on? I need to know. So that's a little bit, I can be a little bit demanding about learning. So when I get into any topic, I get into 100 books, So I try to get every angle possible. So that way I can totally be immersed in the topic.
Yeah.
So the same thing with my identity. We were talking about how identity is a big part of my work.
Yeah.
Well, because we grew up here in the border. And I grew up actually by Southmost, in the Southmost area, Impala, so next to the
yeah.
I grew up in Impala. And so one of the things growing up here, you're Mexican-American, but you're not native, you're not indigenous.
Yes.
So I never understood why I wasn't indigenous if my father was indigenous. He was, he's rest in peace.
Yeah, yeah.
But he was a Huichol, Huirarica. And my uncle never talked about it. He was here from the United States. Well, he lived here in the United States most of his life. And my father, actually, his mother was a U.S. citizen. And basically the family moved back and forth,
Okay.
as we do as semi-nomadic people.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's still a custom that we still have today. So it really bugged me that I couldn't claim to be Native American because I was a Mexican Indian.
Mm.
And it's something that they create this, division. I remember people like, oh no, so nativos. But I'm thinking, we're brown too, and Dad's indigenous. How come I'm not a native? But the thing about it, as I got older, uncovering our roots, our Mexican American origins, learning about the history, the border taken over by the United States through imperialism,
Yeah.
learning about the Spaniards, learning about all the atrocities happened in Mexico and the detribalization of our people. All of that was so evident in my life because I had relatives that were light skinned. On my mother's side, they were light skinned, so they would look down on us for being, indigenous.
Yeah.
But yet, in the United States, I wouldn't be recognized as indigenous. I didn't have any, rights as an indigenous person to my land. Instead, I was considered an immigrant and a foreigner, even though it's my damn land. So you have these contradictions as a child, and I'm like, So crossing the border back and forth, going to Mexico, being here, and seeing all this, and I think that's a good thing about the border. It can be conflicting, and it does bring up a lot of questions in you, but you have to be open to seeing the questions. And a lot of our people here in the border don't want to deal with that. So that's why I work in it. I want people to reach out for their indigenous roots, because once we embrace our indigenous roots, we don't have to claim to be foreigners or migrants. We are from this land. This is our land. So I think it's really important reclaiming our roots to change the narratives, because the narrative out there is that Mexicanos son inmigrantes.
Sí.
Yeah, they do cross over, to go to the fields to work, and they do go back home. They come back and forth. There's people that are transborder, citizens here that come back and forth every day. Pero we're still considered migrants.
Yeah, well, and it's within that nation state framework, right, that we're considered transborders, right, or border people, right, because of that framework and that structure that's in place.
Yeah. There are some areas, like in Arizona, where the indigenous people are in the border, and they are on both sides. But those are tribal nations that have been able to get that recognition. Yeah. But for most of us, that are just kind of lost it, whenever the Spaniards came, and and then a lot of people that are indigenous took the last names too, even though they're full-blooded Indian as well. So that's been my goal, to try and teach people to find themselves. In finding ourselves, we find weapons and tools to make a stake here as our land. The problem is también que aquí in the United States we have people that are tribalized Native Americans, and sometimes they don't want to accept us because we're detribalized. So we have those issues as well within the communities, brown communities.
And it's a really complicated debate, right, and conversation, because when I was living in Utah, that was I think a conversation that we needed to have, but many of us weren't there in terms of, we were, I was considered a settler right there in Utah, right, because those aren't my homelands, right? And that right there is that conversation that I think natives all across the continent need to be having with each other, right? But you have to get to that point where you need to consider yourself native.
Yes.
Right?
And some people are really embarrassed. They're embarrassed to be Indian. I don't like to say Indian because Indian was,
it's a colonial word.
Colonial word. But indigenous, I prefer indigenous.
Yeah.
But it's really hard for people to accept it. And there goes sometimes you feel, when I first started kind of getting to know my roots more and more, and say, why am I being called a Mexican American? Why am I being called Hispanic? Hispanic, what? Or Latin, that's not even, something that was given to all of us, labels that were given to us. And I'm like, well, that's I'm neither any of those. So I ended up, being a Chicana,
Mm-hmm.
Chicanx,
Yeah.
feminist, indigenous. So I found myself. And this was through studying, through the university system. And I know that we a lot of times hear about one of these quotes all the time about how we can't, change the colonizers, institutions through their weapons because,
Oh.
yeah, because, they teach us to be submissive and
Yeah.
not to make sure we keep the institution.
Like Audre Lorde. Yeah.
Yeah,
Audre
it's
Lorde.
Audre Lorde. But I
Mhm.
really believe that learning the tools helps us make changes. So for me, that's been a big part of it because through learning the tools, particular feminism,
Mm-hmm.
feminism was one of those things that really helped me see beyond everything. And it started with feminism. I was very lucky. My mom was a feminist.
Mm-hmm.
So she actually didn't want to get married. She wanted to be a nun, but then she saw how horrible the institution was, and she decided not to be a missionary nun, and ended up with my father. So I grew up always knowing that I could do whatever I wanted to do. There was things I had to be worried about because of culture. So
Yeah.
she warned me about that. And so growing up as a feminist was the first step for me, to
That's your
start
foundation.
Yeah. And although my father was machista, he basically taught that to my brother. I was raised by my mother. So it was kind of interesting. We had like a dualistic
Oh,
upbringing.
wow.
Yeah.
Under the same household.
Under the same household, yeah.
Wow. I wonder how your mom went through doing that. Like, you know what I mean? Like having to contend with all that,
Machismo.
or that masculinity,
Masculinity,
right?
hegemonic masculinity.
Yes, yeah.
That comes with part of Mexican culture as well. Well, she would say, "There's a door."
Mm.
Yeah, there's a door. Yeah, only one time did my father hit us. She told, "Don't you ever do that to my children again." And the reason I got hit was because my brother wanted to see a particular TV station.
Yeah.
And my sister and I wanted to see something else, so we changed it. It's
Yeah.
majority rules.
Yeah.
Well, my father comes in and gets upset because we have upset the boy. The boy's king.
Oh.
So my sister and I got beaten with a belt. It was the only time I was a child, and my mother was furious.
Yeah.
And after that, he never did that again. She threatened him, and so she had to teach him
Your mom had to teach your dad.
to understand feminism, to understand a lot of things. He pretty much grew up on his own.
Okay.
He was kind of an orphan, even though he had a mother, because he grew up in Mexico while his mom was working in the United States.
Oh.
So he didn't have the same opportunities as his brother and sisters.
Who
over
raised
here.
him? Who raised him?
Sadly, it was his grandfather who was very abusive.
Oh.
So
So
that
it's generational.
yes, but luckily my mother, she's one of the smartest people I know,
Mm.
and to this day I still ask her for even though I have a PhD, I've been doing this for 20 years. She's still one of the people I go to for general counsel.
Wow.
Yeah, but yeah, she had to teach him.
And that's an indigenous practice.
Yes. Well, I grew up with indigeneity. That's
Yeah.
the thing, though. And I didn't realize that until I was older. Like, I've grown up, I always grew up with Madre Naturaleza.
Mhm.
We always have to respect Madre Naturaleza. But of course, with the colonial part, Padre, Padre Dios.
Yes. Yes.
So we have Padre Dios y Madre Naturaleza. But everything in our house was about Mother Nature. And I grew up about Mother Nature, Mother Nature, Mother Nature, everything, about every life being important. So there was that holistic view that we've always had. We grew up with herbal remedies and everything that was indigenous, but I didn't know.
No,
Until later on, I'm like, oh, I've been doing this all my life. But it was until I was at the university learning feminism that came, Gloria Anzaldúa.
yeah. Yeah.
We
Gloria.
come across,
La Gloria.
La Gloria, yeah. Gloria Anzaldúa. And of course, I'm still reading more about indigeneity, learning about Christianity, Catholicism, everything I could possibly learn about colonialism, just so I could understand. So it's been a lifelong search. After I came to be comfortable with being Indian or being indigenous,
Yeah, indigenous.
I started spreading the word.
Right. You start preaching.
I started preaching. Yeah, so I'm at that point right now. And I can see how a lot of people falter and don't want to be called indigenous, or they themselves don't think they are. So this student I was talking to him. I said, yeah, well, I'm indigenous.
Mhm.
And he said, nah.
Nah.
You know?
Así que ya lo veo. Nah.
I'm like, he thought it was funny. Because, we grow up with the idea that being indigenous is a bad thing.
Yeah.
That being indigenous, being dark is bad.
Well, and la India Maria,
La India
right?
María, sí.
Yeah.
Ay, me quedé tan mal todo eso.
Yeah.
Sí. I mean, growing up in Mexican TV where everybody's white,
Mhm.
everybody, it's like, who the hell is white all over Mexico? You look around and like the mestizos, indígenas. I'm like,
Un pariente. No,
Ajá. Y el pariente is still, unos pocos están bien light skin, pero los demás tampoco no están tan light skin.
están igual que jodidos que los demás,
Sí,
¿verdad?
yeah.
Sí. Like, it's not like the novelas.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So I'm like, yeah. So that really irritated me, and it irritates me even to this day. I see it, I'm like, oh my God. But there's actually that movement, Poder Prieto in Mexico, which is a colectiva, and they're basically trying to fight for representation of brown people, dark-skinned people on TV, in media. So it's been something that's been going on for a while, and I'm really happy about that. But we have a long way to go, especially when our own students identify as white. And it's not their fault because it started back with LULAC when they wanted to distance ourselves from African Americans. So we didn't want to be black. So therefore, we're going to be labeled as white. That way we won't be discriminated so much. But
for the privileges, right?
yes, but LULAC was wrong in that, of course. And it's created a lot of problems because a lot of people that are Mexican American prefer to call Hispanic so that way it can be white and therefore they can be treated better or not discriminated. The thing is that real white people can tell that you're not white.
Yeah, no, that's still in terms of the structure, right? It's still you're still going to be discriminated.
Yeah.
But and then on the other hand too, it's like when we mark off white as race, we're creating a racialized white majority, and
Exactly.
then that's the issue right there.
Yes.
And that ideology then carries, it's being transmitted, right? So then, oh boy, I marked off white, that means I must be white.
Yeah.
So that means that applies to me, right? Like it's just a very confusing process, but it's propaganda, right? It's like it's around it's imperialism, right?
Yeah. And it makes people very delusional. So then you have all these people voting for white supremacists into office and thinking that they are just like them, and they're not. So that's really aggravating. And I see this here in the Valley so much, and I see so many people want to be distanced away from their indigeneity. They're embarrassed about it. They want to be Americans. And I'm like, well, everybody from north all the way to the tip of South America, Canada all the way down, we're all Americans. So every time the United States people say, oh, I'm American, look, everybody is American. They don't even understand the concept of continent, and that's really aggravating. But yeah,
but we're not the only ones with that problem, right? I mean, Africa is considered a country, Yeah. I mean, we love, but it's imperialism, and it's very simplistic form, right? And makes you think that America is this one little spot in the map, right? And that rules everything, right? So that's how empire starts, even with those simplistic terms.
Well, the maps are made different.
Yes.
The maps are actually given priority in certain countries. So United States looks bigger than what it really is. And so, it doesn't really show the truth of how the
Well, maps
really
are colonial, right?
Yeah.
They were a colonial, they've been a colonial product. An imperialist product too, right? Because like there's this project called Native Lands. They're a group. It's a coalition of. Have you heard of it? Yeah. And how they started was that they started mapping indigenous lands so that developers wouldn't come in and just take over because it's empty. Like what's happening in Bronzeville, right? And SpaceX. So it's really important that we use maps in that way, right, to help our indigenous communities.
Yeah, it's I think it's a great learning tool. It started with the land acknowledgements. So the politics of land acknowledgements is to, of course, venerate and bring truth, to the space about who originally was here, who was, dispossessed from their lands. But one of the problems that I'm seeing, though, in the university levels that are using land acknowledgements, they don't do anything about it. For example, here in the UTRGV, we don't have any land acknowledgements, and I'm fine with that because in front of the university we have a statue of Escandon.
Escandon. Oh, tell us about Escandon.
Well, Escandon was the one that basically came and colonized the border here, or what was called before Nuevo Santander.
Yeah.
And this is all the way from Nuevo León,
Mhm.
Coahuila, Texas, all that area. It was Nuevo Santander. He came here to the border to set up.
To aplacar a los indios,
A
así
los
le
indios.
dijeron. Así le
As a matter
dijeron.
of fact, he was chosen because he was a great Indian killer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
One of the best Indian killers. So therefore, he was selected, to come and continue the colonization here in the border. And that's how we end up having Camargo, Reynosa, in Matamoros, we have missions.
Mhm.
And some other Indians were sent up to San Antonio, Coahuiltecans.
Mm.
So that's why we have a lot of indigenous people from the border here that went to San Antonio as well. So we're spread all over,
Mhm.
So when people talk about, it used to be the land of the Coahuiltecans, or, Lipan Apache, or Karankawa, Texas. The thing is that we're still here.
Okay.
We're still here.
Mhm.
We have not been, erased.
Mhm.
We're still here.
Mhm.
Yet, so we go on as if this used to be land of the indigenous people. No, it still is.
Yeah.
And if we would recognize the fact that we are the
Mhm.
descendants of them, it would change our perspective. It would change the narrative, of more of holistic, more, inclusive.
Yeah.
So
Deep breath.
yeah, so that's been my thing. We actually just my colleagues and I, we just wrote a chapter for a book called BIPOC Alliances,
Mhm.
and it's by Curriculum and Pedagogy Series. And Christian Sperry Garcia, she's one of the main editors. She's here at UTRGV.
Okay.
And we basically wrote how to find yourself indigenous wise.
Oh,
It's kind of like
nice.
a little tools, things that you should think about. Because when you're indigenous, you're not going to find it as easily as when somebody is wealthy. On my mother's side, if I look down her father's side, there's all this documentation. Wealthy people always had documentation, and hacendados. So there's enough documentation of all the families and who married who. So it's easy to trace. That was easy. On my father's side, because we're detribalized, it's a little bit more difficult. It's been a struggle, but I've still managed to do it. But one of the ways that we can do it is, first of all, just start asking your parents or your grandparents, from what areas of Mexico or Latin America or the United States are you from?
Mhm.
Because most of the time, even though we've been semi-nomadic,
Mhm.
we still stay within the same area.
Yeah, we don't venture off too far.
No, we roam the lands,
Yeah.
but we don't go that far. Or we come back to the place where we're from.
Mhm.
So we kind of always settle again in the same areas. For example, I left the valley when I was 18. I wanted to leave the valley so badly because I didn't want to be stuck in the idea that I had to get married and have children.
Okay.
That's something I didn't want in my life. I
Mhm.
wanted to go to college. So as much as, I didn't want to have a boyfriend and I wanted to enjoy those, fruits, I didn't want to get married. I didn't want to have children. I preferred
You
to
never
study.
you never saw yourself that way.
No, I couldn't. I just didn't want to. It's so much work also.
It is a lot of work.
And I think if people were being told exactly how much work it is, it allowed them to make their choices instead of being pressured by culture. Because como chinga la familia a veces, like, when are you getting married, or vas a tener niños, and everybody's always concerned with your life, even though it's your personal
Your
life.
sex life, really?
Yeah, really, yeah. Those bien metiches, are you gay? Are you lesbian? Are you straight? I mean, ¿qué les importa?
Mm.
Pero everybody's always metidos, and I hated that about our families in general. 'Cause, like, let people be. So anyway, yes, I left at 18. I was happy to leave. I wanted to break away from the gender norms
Mm.
that we had here.
Mhm.
And my father didn't want me to leave. He wanted me to stay here at these universities
Mm.
in the border. My mom said, no, déjala ir. Déjala ir. And I was going to go anyway. So
Sí,
it
sí,
didn't
sí.
matter.
Sí, no, sí,
I
pero
was gonna take- So I did. It was beautiful. I mean, I learned so much about U.S. culture.
Mm.
Because living in the border, you don't really know U.S. culture. You think you do because you watch it on TV, you see Kardashians, you see soap operas.
Or because you're on this side of the border,
Yes, you think you're U.S. American, but
you can eat Whataburger.
yes, you can eat Whataburger. You can enjoy the tacos, so you feel very privileged in a lot of ways. Pero going down a few, miles north, we have a checkpoint.
Yes.
We are not free to roam the United States because we're brown people in the border. You know, even white people in the border are the same. But we're not free to roam when you live in the borderlands.
Yeah.
So I felt once you pass the checkpoint, then you really get to know the United States. Then you really get to know some of the discrimination you see day to day. People giving you looks just because you're brown or observing you in different ways. I mean, it's very different dynamics, you know, compared to the border where you feel free in a lot of ways because everybody's brown. Yes, you might not like everybody. You might get a little bit upset at people, but it's not the same. You don't carry around that. I would be scared to get stopped by cops up at, you know, anywhere outside the border. You know, that's something that concerns me.
Yeah.
I like, especially East Texas. I remember visiting my first partner who did prison time in Beaumont. He was in the federal prison there. And I used to travel from Denton all the way to Beaumont by myself. And one of the things, of course, he would tell me, don't stop at the small cities. Make sure you don't, don't travel at night. Make sure you stay, all these things have to be considered. So I would stay on the black side of town, instead of the white side of town.
Yeah.
Because I felt comfortable, with blacks, because to me, there are people,
Well, and there is a lot of racism in Texas. I mean, it's
East Texas. Yeah,
it's East Texas.
Was that Jasper, Texas?
Yeah. I mean, there's some horrible hate crimes that have happened. So it's the history of violence here in Texas.
And recently, I mean, with Jasper, Texas, remember many years ago, there was two white people that dragged a black man behind in their truck.
They tied his hands to the truck and dragged him.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So actually, one of the people that testified against them was somebody that I knew as a child. Oh. But he was inside a prison when they had been talking about such plans. So, so he was one of the witnesses.
So it wasn't because it's been so long ago. It wasn't a random act.
No, they had already talked about it. They had planned it.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and we still see it today. I mean, we had that crazy-ass guy from the Dallas area go down to El Paso to shoot people because the invasion of Hispanics. And the thing that pisses me off about that, because there's a lack of knowledge of history. The invasion of Hispanics. This is our land.
Yeah.
This was Mexico.
Yeah.
And this was indigenous.
But
who are the invaders?
Yeah. But they don't. We haven't been taught that history. The way we're taught about it is that they won the war, right? And they claim, and because of the legitimacy of that war, which we're taught to see war in a very particular way, right? Always benefiting the U.S., right? And always justified in some way. And that's settler colonialism, right? So you go in and that's the way you're taught. So for them, because they won the war, they're entitled. And that's white supremacy, right? They're entitled just because of that.
Yeah. Even though they started a war that was unethical as well.
Of course.
I mean, even on the basis of the doctrine of discovery, in finally now, the Vatican said, we don't believe in that.
Oops.
That was, after all this time, after 500 years of all the exploitation of our people, now it's not real. Okay. Yeah, that pisses me off. But at least there's a change, and there's some, observations about that, and people are coming out about that. So that's good, but still it's exhausting. I mean, doing this kind of work is exhausting because you try to teach people and history just in general. Like people always, some people don't even know. Like if you look at the state troopers' uniforms, it actually says a year that they became Texas.
I don't think I've been that close to a state trooper to look at their. But that's your work though, right? Like I just see a person in uniform.
¿Y por qué siempre andan con esos vaquero hats? I don't get it where that came from. And the sheriffs también. All the sheriffs with the vaquero hats. Like, what does it say?
Yeah, but are they trying to maybe replicate the Texas Rangers in that history, right? That aesthetic.
Yes. That aesthetic. But where does it come from?
The cowboy.
The cowboy.
Yeah.
Yeah, el vaquero. Because that's, of course, more.
You just did a 360 right here.
Yeah. And the vaquero is, of course, is usually considered a white person, even though that's not the case. A lot of vaqueros are Mexicanos, Latinos, indigenous people. But the idea is that the cowboy is always white, and then we have cowboys and Indians. Yeah. And as a kid, many children played cowboys and Indians, and we have
Yeah.
so many damn films about, like, it was John Wayne with cowboys versus Indians.
Yeah, yeah.
And that propaganda of,
Yeah.
like, of course, the savage Indian,
Mhm.
and of course the good cowboy doing the right thing for their family.
The white savior, right?
Yeah, and growing up watching Little House on the Prairie, he was he just stole indigenous land.
Mhm.
But they don't, we don't get taught that. Instead, we're given this beautiful notion of the cowboy, romanticized notion of the Marlboro Man. Do you remember those?
Oh, el
commercials?
Marlboro.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was funny. I have this thing about the Marlboro Man because I was I for a few years I went to Guatemala to do ethnographic research and to learn, ethnographic research. And I was in un camión, like en las montañas,
Sí.
y había un baño, así una casita, no sé si era el baño. Pero estaban usando those tarps. It had the Marlboro Man on it. Yeah.
It is an aesthetic. It is an idea of being cool, collected, and you don't stress under pressure. Very Clint Eastwood, that whole idea. But it's white supremacy notion. So when we have this cowboy thing, and then here, UTRGV, we become vaqueros. And you know who chose to become a vaquero?
Who?
It was President Bailey. It was his choice. People at the university have voted for a different mascot.
Oh, you see, I wasn't here during all that time.
So when we were merging, there were surveys. There were a lot of
Yeah.
a lot of people could vote.
Uh-huh.
So the voting was against a vaquero, but President Bailey, because he had the right to choose, since he was the incoming president, he chose vaquero.
Oh.
Which is a symbol of white supremacy in a lot of ways because of the rhetoric that goes behind it. So you have somebody from the outside come in and gives us this, and then we have Escandón in the front. The university is very much a colonialist, enterprise.
Yeah.
And we continue to do so. So the type of work that I do is not always welcomed.
Of
In my
course,
own
yeah.
department, professors have a hard time understanding what critical criminology is. Critical criminology basically is critiquing the systems, that indoctrinate or hurt and oppress people.
Okay.
So we look at the institutions. Now the problem is that they don't understand that because they come from a more of a institutionalized white supremacist perspectives. So they see criminal justice, of course, very different from what I see. I see problems, and they see order.
When did you start going down that road of critical criminology?
Well, since I was in doctor school.
And that's another question.
Yeah.
Like, why criminal justice? Because you were trained as a sociologist,
Yeah.
correct? But looking at criminology. So how?
Well, sociology is much more broad, and sociology is actually the umbrella to criminal justice.
Okay.
You see, a lot of people think that criminal justice is separate. It actually is an extension of
Okay.
sociology.
Many fields are.
Yes, many fields are. So sociology starts with Augustus Comte, right?
Mhm.
So, and then of course Emil Durkheim.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are the foundational, people there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so we have their methods, their methodology, but the idea of studying groups, society, social organizations, the structure, it's beautiful and it allows you to really understand the system. So what I saw, okay, a social structure. Let's look at this. So that's what brings me to seeing the problems of the institutions, of the system, what people are suffering through. And when you look, we're growing up in the border. I grew up in El Barrio, So one of the things I grew up with a lot is going to jails, visiting friends or juvenile detention centers. So I used to go to juvenile detention centers. I used to go to jail when I was in my,
You were a good friend. I mean,
I also was very curious about those places and the people that were around me. We had friends getting kidnapped, shot at. We had a relative that was involved in drug dealing, did some time, So you grow up with that around, and you want to understand. And of course, I was considered the college girl when I went away. I was a college girl,
Yeah.
right? And even with the people that I would hang out with, I was a college girl. So they respected me for that. But I still was part of El Barrio. I still, got to meet a lot of people. that, went in and out of jail for whatever reasons. My first partner did time.
Okay.
So, and I remember the therapist when I went to therapy for doctor school because of the white supremacy, not because of my partner. Was like, are you with him because he's in prison and it makes it easier? Do you have low self-esteem? I'm like, I grew up with these people. It has nothing to do with that. You don't understand.
Yeah.
So I had to actually teach my therapist. So yeah, that's a whole other thing with
Te la
psychology.
pasaste,
Educated.
yes, yes.
She even told me, because I did go back second time also just because of doctor school. PhD school is so intense.
Yeah.
Because, we know how intense it is for any person, white, brown, black.
Yeah.
You know.
But more so.
It
It weighs heavier.
It can wait, yes. Yeah. I remember a professor telling me, you're brilliant, but lazy. Like, how the hell am I lazy? I'm getting published in doctor school. But it was one of those stereotypes that you get. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, because we're the lazy ones in the
Yeah.
world, even though we carry most of the labor
Yeah.
for
exactly.
consumption, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Who's in the fields doing all the work? Who's doing the cooking? Who's
Mhm.
doing the laundry? Who's
doing the cleaning. Mhm.
Yeah, but we're the lazy ones.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, so I want to hear more about the article that was just recently published about. You started telling us about the ways, right, to find yourself. I think that's really important for us to hear from you because there's already a methodology right out there, and it's important that we understand that because I've done the projects in my class where I have them retrace their migration history, right? Or even there's the family history. And what I've picked up on is most students have never done that as a project or even as a conversation with their parents or with their grandparents, right? But there's also a lot of trauma there. So what I do hear a lot is students telling me, "Hey, I don't want to talk to my grandmother because I know she's going to start crying and I don't want to, bring up all that, but they've heard a little bit about it with their mom or you know what I mean? So there's a lot of trauma there in those type of rememberings, right? So tell me a little bit, tell us a little bit about how we should do this, how we should approach it.
You just said it though.
Okay.
You follow our migration patterns because we migrate places and sometimes we've been in the same place for a long time, but just starting with your grandparents, or your parents. And then from there, keep continuing asking questions. But where we come from, the regions, that says a lot. And with a particular website now that we have, you can actually see what types or what kinds of tribes were in those particular areas. So you kind of get a notion of your possibility of where you might have come from or what areas you were coming from. For example, Huichol, I had no idea until I started studying. Huichol, which is Wirarica, they come from the Huachichiles. The Huachichiles are part of the Chichimeca, who were the ones that continued fighting against the Spaniards. They never lost the war, but they were eventually bought off because some people thought, well, we can't win the war against them because these Chichimecas, as semi-nomadic, well, they would use bows and arrows. They knew, of course, ways of fighting that was different from the Spaniards. So they basically bought them out. They say, okay, we'll give you this, that, here, and there. And so they settled them.
Yeah.
In a different ways. So I didn't even know that, but I just started by kind of just looking into a little bit because I grew up with a book my father had que era de Huicholes, and con los símbolos and all those things, el sol, and talking about el peyote, all that stuff. But only from what he told me, I as a kid, especially as a teen, I just prefer to be Americanized. It seems so much less trouble.
Well, it's convenient.
It's convenient. And I thought, it's easier. I don't want to really have to know my own indigenous culture so much. I want to know it privately, but I know that I have to live in white America. So I'm just, Americanized and learn everything I can about white people and about U.S. American culture. So leaving the Valley, I did learn a lot about that.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of the myths about white people dissipated when I was around white people.
The
romanticism of
yeah.
white people,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of romanticism here in the Valley about white people.
Yeah.
So I get them like, oh, okay, one of the things that I would hear people say all the time was white people are smarter than brown people, right? And it's something that white supremacy sells all the time. Right?
That's an old.
Eugenics.
Yeah.
Eugenics. It's a eugenics movement. But I get to school and I'm like, wow, they lack critical thinking. And I already had critical thinking. Growing up with struggle, you develop critical thinking.
Oh, real quick.
Real quick, yeah, exactly. And I could see there was so much immaturity in the 18-year-olds compared to an 18-year-old Latino, Latina, or indigenous Mexican American person. I was like, interesting. So yeah, a lot of the myths about the superiority starts falling apart when I go to school.
Yeah.
So that was important. So where were we? We're talking about migrations, things like
Yeah,
that. So I didn't really want to know so much. I just wanted to learn it more as historical, as something that I put into my vault of knowledge about indigeneity. I didn't think I was going to become a scholar activist. You see, I was just trying to do research.
Yeah.
And research. That was what I wanted to do, is do research. That was my goal. And along the way, things changed, because once you start digging and you realize, the myths dissipate of white supremacy, because we still all grew up with it, pledge allegiance to the flag,
Yes.
And I remember growing up as a kid thinking of the president as being kind of like the father of the country.
Yes.
So there's all
very
this,
paternalistic.
yes, this patriarchal idea that they take care of us. I mean, but it's all propaganda, of course, and you don't break away from it sometimes until you leave the Rio Grande Valley. For a lot of people here, I think it's important to leave or to really have struggle. A lot of people that grew up with privilege don't see that. They just don't see that at all. So even though I've had a hard, it was a difficult life in a lot of sense, I was very happy anyway, because at the same time, the struggle has made me see so much more at an age when I was younger, faster. So, So by 18, I'm like, okay, this is really messed up. So that really changed a lot, leaving the valley for me.
Yeah.
And other people, I don't know if it's the same for others, but I think living outside of the colonized border, outside of the, the wires, because we live within the wires, changes everything.
The wires. I love that. I really love that. I moved to San Antonio for a little bit, for about 10 years. And then I came back after my divorce, and I really didn't feel that brown-white divide in San Antonio, because I was living in the west side, and before it got gentrified. So it was a really different experience. I mean, there were gunshots at night. You know what I mean?
But they hear it all the time.
Yeah, but it was just different. So I lived there for a while. Then we moved out into like the north side of San Antonio, but my friends were still our group of people. We were brown. We were. It was, and I ended up marrying a native of San Antonio, so. He knew it. I mean, he was everywhere in San Antonio, right? Like, and he grew up in the west side. So I didn't feel that divide so much. It was, I think for me, it was a little bit different experience. And then I came back, and when I left though, I saw wealth, like real wealth, like not without sounding so, I don't know. It's just there's wealth here, but right. In Utah there was just a whole other level of wealth. I mean, there's a lot of money, and that for me was the most eye opening, where I was like, oh wow, like I was in a bubble. And then I learned a lot leaving. I don't know. I mean, for me, I have a really difficult time with because I know we experience a brain drain here in the valley, but I know a lot of us come back, right? But there's always that risk of losing brilliant minds, right, to other places. And we're in. I don't know if it's happened to you, but you could be somewhere out there and somebody is from Bronzeville. I mean, I was at the movie theater. I think we were going to go see the first movie of the Black Panther. And the two men in front of it was a young man and his father. They were from Bronzeville. You know, it's like we just started talking, and then we turns. We even took pictures. So I mean, I know we disperse, right? And there's just some uniqueness to this place.
There really is, though. But going back to the way you experience your youth, you know,
Yeah.
Well, the thing about it, I also had to confront racism within my own family. That's a problem, though. And within our own families, we have racism.
Yeah.
So we were considered, you know, beneath my cousins because I was dark skinned, and of course my dad's name was too indigenous because it was Matilde, so it's too effeminate. So they kept changing his name all the time. It's Jose Matilde, you know. So they would always change his name. They didn't want my mother to be with him. You know, they actually stopped talking to my mother for 5 years. When she got together with my father. So the racism first began with my own step grandmother, and with my aunts. We were light skinned. One of them actually told me at 9 years of age that I would never amount to much, even though I was smart, that her daughter, being light skinned, would do so much better than me. Things like that. So I get this at 9 years old, and I'm like, what the hell's going on? So to me, I was like, well, whatever. I'm a U.S. citizen.
Yes, you fall back to that.
Yeah, I fall back to that. And that's why I think I wanted to distance myself from some Mexican cultural stuff, because I was like, well, I don't want to be like them. Yeah. But that pushed me along with feminism, you know. So since a little kid, I've been doing critical race theory. It was just part of my upbringing. I was watching it, looking at it. So I think it's really important for anybody that starts looking into their past or, you know, patterns.
Yeah.
You have to do it with a critical eye, but thinking about, you know, gender, thinking about, you know, the race, ethnicity, nationality. It's super complicated, and it takes you so many different paths.
And I mean, I think even critical, the term critical, right, has its own history, and it has its own method, right? So for me, I think critical is just questioning power. And detecting it, right? Because you in the questioning, you learn how to detect power and the abuse of power. Yeah.
So many people don't question it. That's what I'm saying. Well, I was about to say. So I had an exercise last semester in class, and you know, about you know, your identity in social justice class, and so many of our students identified as white, and I'm like, wow, amazed, you know, but. That's what you get trained. That's how you get.
Well, yeah. For instance, I mean, even in the hospitals, right? I mean, if a family doesn't know, well, they'll put you as white. That's default, right? So it's even if because I've been in situations, and my mom has too, where we don't fill it in, so it gets filled in for us by default. It gets put white as white.
Yeah. For a while, I was putting mestiza. Now I just put native.
Yeah.
But it was part of that coming to terms with being indigenous and accepting my own indigeneity. Yeah. So it's a process as well.
It is.
Because a lot of people that I know are indigenous don't even claim it. And I'm like, but you are, you know.
But again, it's a journey, right? Everybody's at different places.
Yeah. And that's the thing, that you have to start with yourself. And that's one of the things that we really focus on this article. It starts with you. It's until you know, you got to figure this out first, your own identity, who you are. Yeah. Once you accept that part of you, then everything comes easy. Yeah. Then everything makes sense. Then everything that you've learned, because indigeneity is everywhere. I mean, todo lo que hacemos, everything, what we eat. Estamos comiendo tacos todo el tiempo. I love tacos, you know. corn. I mean, that was something that was developed by our indigenous ancestors, you know, and from Mesoamerica, you know, they actually traded and spread all the way to parts of North America. So we fed the continent. Yes. And we eat that today all the time. So last time Mom and I were talking about el aguacate, the origins of aguacate.
Yeah.
It's
también aguacate.
Aguacate. You know, it's Mesoamerican. You know, yeah. So it's like so many things. You know, words. You know. Yeah. Like for example, the word that I'm really in love with right now is mitote. Mitote. That's my favorite word right now. Mitote. I grew up with the idea que me decían mitotera. Sí. Because I meant troublemaker. Yeah. You know, and I was like, well, whatever. That I was loud, and I didn't understand it. Why am I loud? I'm just asking questions. but that was associated with mitotera. Well, my mom was always saying, son mitotes, pero associated with the lower class, which is the indigenous class.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, like later on, like, oh, it makes sense. Well, when the colonizers came, we used to have mitotes.
Mm-hmm.
And the mitotes are basically the powwows,
Yeah.
you know, those celebratory dances for prayer at the beginning of any event. So they didn't want so many indigenous people hanging out together, so they started banning los mitotes. So it becomes negative along the way, you know. So that's, but it's basically the powwow. It is the same thing that is practiced in North America. And so sometimes people say, you know, como los danzantes, los concheros,
Sí.
you know, those, es un mitote,
Yeah.
you know. They start mitotes.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a powwow. It's the same stuff.
I know, I'm learning so much about the mitote through you. It's like I had, because I grew up with the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, mitoteras. Yeah.
Yeah, soy mitotera, and I'm happy to be mitotera now. And I'm like, But it's even more beyond that, because it's a spiritual word. It's a spiritual acknowledgement, and it's all tied in with indigeneity and with resistance.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're still a mitotera after 500 years, that says a lot.
Yeah.
That means that we're one of the people that are still fighting for our rights, fighting to be seen as indigenous people. So it's beautiful. I mean, there's so much beauty into that. So yeah, just thinking about all the words that we use, everything around us, the knowledge. I mean, todos usamos el huevo para darnos una limpia.
Ay, sí, si no sabes cómo, vas con alguien,
Sí,
con la señora.
ajá.
Con la señora, yeah. Okay, so we're gonna, you need to come back. Whenever you're on Thursday night, you're in Bronzo, you're going to have to come into the show on Fridays.
I wish it was later, though. It's so early at 10:30.
What? It used to be at 9, but we
Oh my God,
we
y
switched
bueno.
it. Okay, so thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. You're gonna have to come back again. So everyone, I am gonna be next week. I'm gonna be in Edinburgh for the food summit. UTRGV is having a food summit. It starts on Wednesday, goes all the way through Friday. So look it up. Go if you can. You need to register. It's free, and there's gonna be a great conversation throughout from farmers and people who are involved in food systems here in the whole valley. So please go. Again, it's UTRGV Food Summit. Okay, so I won't be here next week. Thank you again to our guest, and we're going to end the show with Redbone. Come and get your love. Enjoy, have a good weekend, and we'll talk in 2 weeks.